On behalf of the Judiciary's Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts, the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee, and the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center, aloha mai kākou. Welcome and thank you for joining us today in our series of conversations called Confronting Racial Injustice, Achieving Racial Equity in Hawaii. My name is Troy Andrade, and I'm a law professor and proud director of the Ulu Lehua Scholars Program at the William S. Richardson School of Law at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm also a co-chair of the HSBA Civic Education Committee and a member of the executive board of the Judiciary History Center. In other words, I get very, very, very little sleep. Joking aside, I can confidently say that I would not be in these positions had it not been for intentional decisions and actions by others made prior to and during my lifetime to prioritize diversity, inclusion, and empowerment, the theme of today's discussion. As one example, in 1974, Dr. George Johnson, a former dean of Howard Law School and a civil rights attorney who assisted in writing briefs in landmark cases like Shelley versus Kramer and Brown versus Board of Education, Dr. Johnson was wooed out of retirement by our very own Chief Justice William Richardson to implement CJ's dream of providing opportunities for legal education in Hawaii to those from underserved and underrepresented communities. Convinced, George Johnson created the pre-admission program, which since its inception provided opportunities for, among others, Native Hawaiian, Filipino, Samoan, Micronesian, Latinx, and Black students to become lawyers in Hawaii. That program provided me, a Native Hawaiian kid who grew up in public housing with no college graduates in my family, with a chance to realize CJ's dream, but a chance to realize my own dream of becoming an advocate and lawyer. Johnson's program, now called the Ulu Lehua Scholars Program, continues that valuable mission of extending a hand and uplifting everyone in our community. And this is just one example. In today's program, we will dive headfirst into this issue of diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. Our panelists today will address how all of Hawaii benefits when the makeup of our institutions and organizations reflect the diversity of the communities served, thereby bringing together diverse perspectives, talents, and experiences. We are truly in for a treat today, as we have a wonderful panel to guide us through this very, very important topic. Our first panelist today is Jen Jenkins. Jen is a community advocate that has been recognized for their passion for justice and equity. A public policy advocate for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Jen has continued to make their mark on legislation. In 2019, for example, while a law student, Jen was instrumental in passage of laws that made life a little more equitable for our LGBTQ community. As Jen's former professor, I can say from personal experience that Jen brings a rare mixture of true dedication and passion for equity with the smarts and humility to make it happen. So thank you, Jen, for joining us. Prior to her appointment as the first woman and person of color to serve as dean of our law school, our next panelist, Camille Nelson, served as dean of American University Washington College of Law, and prior to that, she was the first woman and person of color to serve as dean of Suffolk University Law School in Boston. Dean Nelson has been recognized with many honors, including being named among the top 35 women in higher education by the magazine Diverse Issues in Higher Education, and was listed as one of the most influential people in legal education by the National Jurist. Boy, are we lucky to have her here. We are grateful, Dean Nelson, that you've agreed to participate on this panel in between what we know are many, many commitments that you have. Because she has another engagement, she may need to leave shortly before the formal end of our program. But thank you, Dean Nelson, for joining us. Our final panelist, Bill Harrison, is an award-winning and well-respected lawyer, partner, and founding member at Harrison and Matsuoka Attorneys at Law. With over 4 decades of practice under his belt, Bill has received Martindale Hubbell's highest rating and has since 2006 been annually recognized as one of the best lawyers in America. His practice focuses on criminal defense and constitutional issues. Aside from being a founding member and past president of the Afro-American Lawyers Association, he has spent countless hours in service to others in the community, including serving as a member and chair of Hawaii's Judicial Selection Commission. Thank you, Bill, for your time today. Today's panel discussion is ably moderated by Ian Tapu, a 2020 graduate of Richardson and a community advocate on numerous fronts. For example, while he was in law school, Tapu was instrumental in helping to establish the Pacific Island Law Students Association, which did many things to encourage legal careers for college grads of Pacific Island backgrounds. Like Jen, Tapu was a student of mine and another example of the best of the best. Our program today, like those in the past, is grounded in mutual respect and above all, aloha. Should you have questions during this program, please submit them through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and the panelists will try to get through as many of them as possible. With that being said, it's my pleasure now to turn everything over to Tapu. Aloha.
Mahalo nui and fa'afetai tele lava, Professor Andrade, and all those who helped to make this event a possibility. Before we do begin to get into the substance of the topic today, I would like for each of our panelists to go down and give us the name you'd like to go by, the pronouns you would like to be referred to by, and if there's anything else in terms of biographical information that you'd like to share before we get into the substance. We'll start with Jen and then move on to Dean Nelson, and then we'll end with Mr. Harrison.
Aloha, everyone. My name's Jen. I use they, them pronouns. Thank you for such a great introduction, Troy, and thank you to the judiciary for having such a timely conversation and panel series.
Good morning. Thank you so much for including me. I greatly appreciate it. My name is Camille, and I go by she, her, hers. So thank you for asking, and I'm honored to be here amongst you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Harrison. I go by he or him, and I'm just honored to be amongst this distinguished panel here. I think we'll have a great discussion today. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, everyone. My name is Tapu. I go by my last name, and I think it's fitting to be part of this conversation. I go by my last name because I'd like to breathe in my grandparents who are immigrants from Samoa in every space that I enter, especially the legal profession, which typically does not have people that look like me, and I'm excited to get into this conversation. So to kind of, as a first disclaimer, the panelists here today are not the arbiters of diversity, inclusion, and empowerment. This topic is broad, amorphous even, and for some people, this topic can be frustrating, it can be daunting. What these panelists do offer are their own personal experiences, and they provide their expertise based off of those personal experiences. So with that framing in mind, I want to start with Jen to kind of help bring this conversation to make it more grounded. Jen, the conversations about diversity are often limited to topics of race and gender. And even when we do have those conversations, they tend to be narrowly focused on certain races or often viewed with the perspective of gender as a binary. With that being said, can you frame diversity for us with the focus on intersectionality? Or in other words, what does intersectionality mean? And why is that perspective framework important?
Sure. So if we solely focus on race and gender, we won't really get free and we won't get justice. Intersectionality asks more of us when it comes to creating a diverse space. Diversity is often thought of as having enough representation of a particular race or gender in an organization such as a law firm. So we would see something like, oh, we have enough women, or do we have enough Black, Brown, or Indigenous people? Then we've created a diverse environment. We have this representation there. But under an intersectional framework, a legal organization would seek to hire people that are marginalized in addition to and beyond their race and gender. Intersectionality asks us to actively dismantle various systems of oppression. So true diversity, intersectional diversity, would include seeking out and creating an environment that's safe for trans people, gender variant folks, that addresses patriarchy in workplace, addresses colorism, and then once all of these different aspects of a person, of these oppressed peoples, are brought into a law firm or a judiciary or any type of legal workplace, we would pay, promote, and treat all of these folks in a dignified way. We would see them as partners in law firms, in management roles. We would see them consistently getting promoted. So intersectionality just really asks us to take diversity a step further and to really make sure we're being inclusive, not only in representation, but in how we're treating people. And I really like, Tapu, how you talked about bringing your ancestors into it, because intersectionality has an ancestry to it. It was first addressed in Boston by a group called the Combahee River Collective. And they They described intersectionality as struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression. And they see it as part of their analysis that all systems of oppression are interlocking. And then later, a phenomenal legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, coined the phrase intersectionality and described it as how race, class, and gender and other individual characteristics intersect with and overlap. And then finally, present day, we have the Black Lives Matter movement talking about intersectionality. And there, we've seen an evolution in thought and process around diversity and intersectionality. And what's really great about having this conversation today is that we get to add to that, and we can grow and bring it into the context of Hawaii and what intersectionality looks like for us.
Thank you so much, Jen. Dean Nelson, oftentimes in Hawaii, there's a sense of exceptionalism. We believe sometimes that we're too distant or too different from the continent. And I'm really curious from your experience, how, if any, are the concerns and triumphs relating to diversity similar or different here in Hawaii as opposed to on the continent?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. You know, I would be really surprised if a number of the historical threads around discrimination and oppression did not similarly resonate here. I mean, the founding, right, of the state as we know it was forged through imperialism, colonization and violence. And there's a lot to unpack there, and legal scholars and historians with far more expertise than I, like Troy, Professor Andrade, know the details far better than many of us, including me. But I think that it would be folly to assume that we are immune from what tends to stymie humans all over the world. So, you know, my nearest analogy is having grown up in Canada, where it was so much of the culture to say, you know, you should be grateful that you're here. This was the ethos, because it's so much worse down there, meaning south of the border in the States. And I think that type of exceptional thinking allows communities and cultures to not self-interrogate or to be aware of the ways in which they participate in white supremacy, in racism, in colonization, in othering and abusing people who they think are not like themselves. So I would never want us to be complacent based on a sense that we are better than anybody else at tackling these issues. Similarly, I think it allows for sort of a laziness of thought, perhaps, right? I mean, I think if you look around many places, including here, you have to ask the question, where are we not? Whatever the we is, and I want to, applaud Jen's description of intersectionality, right? But what does that mean for us here, right? What does leadership look like? What does power look like? What does wealth look like? Who is included, who's excluded, and why, right? How is that anchored in our history here? So I think that we have to be very careful, although I think Hawaii has done some things incredibly well, we have to be very careful not to fall into that trap that we've done more than other people, we think, and therefore we don't have more work to do. I think we have the possibility of being international leaders in so many areas. And so we have to stay vigilant. And I mean, just like being lifelong learners as legal professions and legal educators, we have to continue to be lifelong learners around diversity and inclusion and empowerment, and what that continues to mean as we evolve as a country and as a world.
Thank you, Dean Nelson. Bill, you have such broad experience as a litigator and as a member of the Judicial Selection Committee. And through these various roles, and among others, what does diversity mean to you, and why does it matter to you?
Okay, I think it'd be good if I gave you 3 brief anecdotes that happened to me early in my career that kind of shaped my ideas surrounding diversity in the courts. I had, very early on, I had a young Polynesian male who was being sentenced in a court before an Asian judge. And we were talking before the sentencing, and the client said to me, I know I'm going to go to jail. And that's just the way it's going to be. And I felt actually exactly the opposite. I thought he was of the nature of his background and everything else and his record, that he would not have to go to jail. And the judge did sentence him to jail, and the judge made a comment about something about people like you. And the first thought in my head was he saying people like you in terms of who break the law? Or is he talking about people like you because of your ethnicity or what have you? And that question wasn't answered. And then I give you another two examples that really hit this point. And I had two, and this again, early in my career, I had two murder trials that were back to back. One was an Asian male who killed his wife. And the other was a woman who was a prisoner, and she was Black, and she had killed her former lover in prison. And both of those cases were tried. The gentleman, the Asian male, ultimately I got a manslaughter conviction for him. And the Black woman got convicted of the offense. And so, you know, clearly in terms of the trials of those two cases, I felt as though the judge in each of those cases, they were different judges, really took a side in terms of the prosecution of the cases. And so I think that it really influenced how those cases were shaped and how they came out. And clearly, under those circumstances, the verdict shouldn't have been any different. Both of these individuals were, we defended under an EMED defense, which is an emotional distress defense, and an insanity type of defense. And both had strong defensible witnesses in terms of the psychologists and the psychiatrists, but the outcomes were clearly different. And so those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of decisions really shaped what I looked at in terms of this sort of diversity on the bench. And so when I got the call from former Judge Wahe to be a member of the Judicial Selection Commission, I jumped at that opportunity because I sought to go onto that commission to see if I can do something to change the complexion of the courts. Because clearly, you know, when men and women deliver justice, look more like people in our community, obviously, there's a greater confidence in our judicial system, and that goes throughout. And we'll talk about a little bit later on, how do we work to make that better. But that's really my experience through a litigator, through litigation, through the courts, that really shaped how, you know, my thoughts were regarding this diversity issue.
Thank you, Bill. So as you've noticed, kind of the first bucket we're kind of delving into was giving us framework and context as to what diversity means. This next bucket of questions is really to kind of bring us a little lower down to see what are the barriers, what are the problems, concerns we see, whether it's from our time professionally, whether it's personally growing up on the islands or elsewhere, and that intersection with diversity. And so first to Jen, what barriers have you seen from an intersectional perspective, and in what ways are these barriers institutional and non-institutional?
So my first thought is sometimes we're lawyers ourselves are our own barriers, just because the legal profession as a whole really wasn't made for marginalized people. It was created for cisgender white men, and so we're seeing a complete and total shift in the legal profession because people like myself and like yourself, Tapu, and all of us actually on this panel are able to exist and thrive in the legal profession. But like personally, of course, there's a tremendous amount of struggle. I can think of just being non-binary. I'm pretty sure I was the first non-binary person at our law school. I'm pretty sure I'm the only non-binary person that works for the state government, to my knowledge at least. And there comes a struggle with that. And something that's really incredible about choosing to be myself authentically in a space is that it opens up other people to diversity and what that can look like. But not all of us are here to be like a martyr, for lack of a better word. And so it's really on organizations and institutions to make sure that spaces are already accessible, and there doesn't have, I can't wait till there's no more firsts, the first Black anything, the first Native one. I just want, I can't wait till we move beyond that. We need to open up spaces to allow that to happen. And we need to do it intersectionally, because if we aren't doing it intersectionally, we're still going to create and manifest barriers don't need to be there and actually hinder what could be an even stronger profession for all of us.
Jen, if I can piggyback and kind of respond, can you provide more clarification for our viewers as to what non-binary means and why the choice or the decision to use they, them? Because I think we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of having these conversations. And I know sometimes part of that conversation is making sure we bring people up to speed and clarifying definitions for everyone. So would that be okay with you?
Yeah, sure, of course. We also did a great HSBA panel if you want to check that out. Tapu, myself, and Trisha Nakamura and Thaddeus Pham. So yeah, our video is recorded. But so when I say that I'm non-binary, I mean that, so I should explain the binary first. The binary is man and woman. That's typically how we're socialized to exist, people. I mean, from the time that we're born, we're determined by our sex to be either a man or a woman. And Western culture doesn't really allow for much beyond that. And colonized culture doesn't allow beyond that. And I just recognize within myself, and plenty of other trans people do too, that's not who we are. So I use they, them pronouns because she, her, and he, him, neither would be quite accurate. Not all non-binary people use they, them pronouns. Some non-binary people, people use whatever pronouns they want. That's just what I choose to use because it's gender neutral, and I don't have to subscribe to the man-woman gender binary that is prevailing today.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. Next to Dean Nelson, and I think Bill also hinted to this as well about representation, but representation doesn't happen unless we make sure that we have that pathway, that pipeline. And so when discussing education or any profession, topics of pipeline always come up. So as an educator and administrator, can you describe the pipeline to the legal field and what barriers you've seen?
Sure. And I want to just second Jen's, I'll be happy when there are no more firsts as well, right? Because I want to speak to the added burden that those of us who are, continually in these roles carry, part of which is trying to make sure the door is held open behind us or after us so that, and it's farther ajar so more people can come into the space and do the good work that we know needs to be done. But it is something, I'll be honest, that I am ever mindful about, the ways in which any mistakes or missteps I make might be held against someone who looks like me or is believed to be like me. So I want to be really upfront about that dynamic. In terms of the barriers, and with pipelines, I think one of the things we need to recognize is there is need for more work in this space. And I want to complicate the question because one of the things that's a barrier, at least from my vantage point as a leader of a law school, and zoom out the 10 years I've been doing this work, is there are so many overlapping constituencies who don't agree on priorities. So I think many people often think a dean or an associate dean or a provost or someone has all this power. And we are basically middle management navigating accreditors who have their own priorities, right? And we have to be mindful of those lest we lose our accreditation. We have our alumni, we have our students, we have our faculty, and we have our staff. We have the Department of Education. We certainly have the US News and World Report. We have the upper campus or the main campus. We have other law schools. We have the larger community. We have the legislature. And one of the things that would be helpful is, as we think about the pipeline, is getting agreement with all amongst the constituencies that these things are a priority. And we have to invest in, resource, commit to, prioritize diversification and inclusion within the profession so that we can empower the next generations of leaders, right? So the role of the law school is like in the middle of a wheel. Maybe we're not the center, but that's my vantage point, trying to negotiate and advocate amongst all of these various constituencies that this bit matters. because it allows the whole rest of the constellation to move forward towards hopefully social justice. So, I encourage us to zoom out as we think about all of the areas that we need to be in conversation with to make sure that we build those pipelines. One of the proudest moments of my life and one of the most transformative was teaching in the Ulu Lehua Scholars Program here. And Troy was one of our phenomenal students. And that we need more programs like that at the same time that we are making sure that our students coming into the school and into the programs are set up for success. And I want to zoom back just to something that we know now happens. Heretofore, we focused on pipelining from undergrad college programs with greater intensity than in other areas. And we have enough research now to understand that over a third of people who come to professional schools, and law schools in particular, are making those decisions from high school and before high school. So we've got to be intentional about talking to middle schoolers. We're talking 6th, 7th grade, because frankly, as was my experience, that's where people start telling you what you cannot be, if not before, right? If not before, let's be real about that. So we need to be thinking about how we work with our teachers in K through 8, our teachers and counselors, K through 12th grade, right? And thinking about how we start encouraging people to think about an education as an opportunity to college and beyond. But I want to signal that because there has been some really interesting work around that dynamic that I think has been underexplored.
Dean Nelson, can you give some personal examples? I think sometimes we get lost in the abstract, and
Yeah.
I'll use my personal example. So when I was applying to colleges, my own college counselor told me to look at community college because that was a better fit for me. Not even looking at my transcript, not really looking at what I've done so far in high school. And I'm glad I didn't listen to him and became the first Tongan to go to Dartmouth. But like, you have to have that kind of motivation to say no and that I'm better than that. But when you haven't been conditioned or given enough tools to be able to say no, I think that's where the shift needs to happen. So if you want to expound on that, I would love to hear.
Yeah. And some of this, sometimes I don't think about it because it hurts. You know what I mean? Like you start to go back and you think, gosh, there are so many things could have taken me off a pathway that I'm really happy I followed. So I think back to 7th grade, and when you're young, you admire your teachers, and I hope people admire their faculty too. But you know what I mean? Like so you're inclined to accept when someone tells you cannot do something. You can't unpack when you're 10, 11, 12 fully that it might be because they're racist or sexist or classist or anti-immigrant or don't like your mom's accent or whatever, you know what I mean? And I remember my teacher saying, even though I was a really good student, I would always get A's, but B's in spelling and art. But otherwise I was a strong student. So 5 A's, 2 B's. And he said, we were starting to do our high school applications all through public school, so we get to this point. And he says, you should really think about going to the vocational school to become a hairdresser. Now, I'm not demeaning. I mean, I really need a good loctician if anybody, wants to recommend, I think I found one in Honolulu, but I was on track to go to high school. And I was on track to go to the local high school that was a feeder from my elementary school, right? And thankfully, my father interrupted that. And I went home with the form for him to sign so that I could go to the vocational school to study hairdressing. And he was livid, right? And he called it what it was. And, similarly, other things like that have happened along the way. And I want to also flag that, just because we're in these roles doesn't mean stuff doesn't continue to happen, right? I mean, since I've been here, some interesting things have happened, right? Because it doesn't matter when you're walking down the street, people aren't like, oh, she's the dean of the law school. You're just another Black person walking down the street, right? Or another Black person applying for a mortgage or whatever, or looking for a house or whatever, right? So I want to disabuse people of the fact that, well, now you've made it, in quotes, so these things stop happening. They don't. I think what you learn along the way is a bit more about how to call it what it is and to navigate it. But every single time it chips away a little bit of your soul. And it takes a toll on you. And that's the weathering that so many of us go through, that frankly is why we have, I think part of why we have disparate, health outcomes and don't live as long in many cases, but that's a topic for another day.
Thank you, Dean Nelson. Bill, so I just want to kind of bring in the conversation that I had with Dean Nelson, and she gave this comment about, we've made it, and then you pause, then you take a step forward and you say, you made it again, then you pause and take a step forward. And so it almost becomes this really exhausting exercise. And I intentionally use the word exercise because it's constant. And I feel like your experience with the Judicial Selection Committee, you must have, or maybe did have, these moments where, like, we made it. Okay, what more can we do? We made it. What more can we do? So if you can really kind of talk to us about the barriers that you've seen, because Dean Nelson is talking about the pipeline, but we can't have a diverse bench until we have a diverse student body, but we can't have a diverse student body until we have diverse applicants. So there's so many different components that Dean Nelson was talking about, and I would love to hear your kind of thoughts about that.
Okay, and I want to start where you folks left off at, because I want to give you my experience. I grew up in, my formative years was in New York, and I was in a fairly cosmopolitan community. We had all types of races and ethnic backgrounds of people. We had, we had a fairly large Orthodox Jewish community as well. But I remember going in and the same situation. It was I guess it was maybe the 10th or 11th grade. We'd go into the counselor to see what direction we should go. And my counselor told me, and I had really good grades as well. My counselor told me that vocational school was probably my best bet. And my parents, none of them went to college, and obviously none of any of my parents were professionals. But when I went home that evening, I was dejected, and I sat down with my mother, who she was a hardworking person, very, very dedicated to education and so on. And she just told me, look, you can be what you want to be. So, get rid of these notions that you need to do this or need to do that. You cut your path. Okay. So that brings you back to the Judicial Selection Commission. Now, there's a lot of things that we need to do because there's a lot of barriers here. Okay. First of all, when I came on the commission, at the time, I was probably the youngest person on the commission. And basically, I was awed at the members of that commission. I mean, we had people on there who had life experiences. We had top-notch litigators on that commission. And we had some very, very strong women, which was really important for that commission. But you'd sit in these commission hearings and our discussions, and you would hear things that you knew, obviously, we shouldn't be thinking about. And so those kinds of situations, as someone of color, you need to speak out. You need to talk to folks, and you need to explain situations. And one of the things I think that's really important that's going on now, this conversation, which was part of one of the conversations that you folks had here, was this implicit bias conversation. I think that we need to really get folks who are on these kinds of commissions, especially like the Judicial Selection Commission and other commissions that are really important in terms of looking at diversity, looking at inclusion, right? To have this discussion, because we all have these implicit biases, and we need to recognize those and try our best to eliminate those from our conversations, our thought processes. Whatever we do, whatever we say, whatever people say to us sticks in our mind. We have an incredible computer up there on our shoulders, and eventually it gets in there, and we just gotta just really eliminate those kinds of distractions that really a lot of people don't think that they mean very much. And we have a discussion in this community, and we talked about this. I did an implicit bias training, and we talk about how this community is very diverse, and this community is looked at, in the U.S. and in the world as a very cosmopolitan community that gets along and so on. And we have songs that we sing that, and we have comedians that talk about race, and it's not a big deal, and it's not a big issue. And that's, I think, really that's a wrong way to look at this. And I think that we need to really understand and consider those thoughts. So one of the things that I think we need to do as Dean said, as Jen said, we need to go and start from an early age. And as you brought out, okay, it's not about at this later date trying to change things. And I think I like what the UCLA coach, his name escapes you at the present time, said one time. He said that when given an opportunity, it's too late to prepare. And basically, that's what we need to do. We need to go back and we need to start from the beginning at an early time in the development of individuals. And then we got to move it on to the bigger question when we get to the selection process. And I want to say that, number one, that I'm very, very supportive of a merit selection process of picking judges. I think that the studies and have shown that merit selection is the best way to get a diverse judiciary. Elections don't do it. Direct appointments don't do it. Merit selection is the course that we need to take. And I think the ABA has done studies on it and other organizations, and they show that the diversity of the bench is better under a merit selection process. But that merit selection commission has to be made up of people, okay, that going to draw people to that commission to apply. And that's one of the things that I really saw as a member of the commission is the applications coming in. A lot of people did not want to apply because obviously the gauntlet of getting through to becoming a judge is very difficult, but also you have to go through this commission first. And if the commission doesn't look like you, doesn't have the same ideas that you have, ideals and thoughts, it's a daunting experience just to get to that point. So I think that when we have people who select these commissioners, the appointing authorities, who elect them, the HSBA, people have to think about who they put in those positions that ultimately will shape who comes out on those lists from those commissions.
Thank you, Bill. And I think you really helped to segue into the next topic, which is solutions, and kind of giving our viewers what are some actionable and measurable steps for them to take back to whatever spheres of influence, whether it's their family, their community, or work. So you did touch upon doing implicit bias training or making sure that people are educated more about what it is to be implicitly biased. Are there any other steps people can do or any other trainings that people can take back to their groups besides implicit bias training?
Yeah, I think that what we need to do is that training has to go throughout our legal community, well, throughout the community at large, but especially our legal community, because we need to have the present sitting judges also be involved in this process. You know, when we select individuals to sit on the bench, we want that diversity there because we want colleagues to confer with one another. We want you know, judges who have not experienced things in their background to talk to people who have experienced those things. And so clearly we need to get this training out to the judges. We need to, as I said earlier, the commissioners are really important as well. But throughout the system itself, we need this kind of a training that has to go on. You know, also we need to get people to understand, just like Jen says, just like Dean says, what specifically we're going through and what we all of us are dealing with in this you know, this global community and working with folks. And as Jen says, you know, we need to be able to welcome and include people that are marginal in this decision-making process as well. And the commission itself, generally the commission I sat on, and I can't speak for the commissions after me, I would note that there's a lot of good work that is coming out of that commission because our statistics as a state are very good, especially diversity in terms of gender. It's lacking in terms of representation by various ethnic groups in the community, but we're far ahead of other states in that regard. But we need to understand and include those folks in the decision-making process, as Jen says, at the commission level as well, at various appointments throughout the judiciary on committees and the like. It has to filter through the whole judiciary and everything that we do and in terms of task forces and committees and everything else. We have to think the broader picture and we have to think of inclusion of everyone in that process.
Thank you, Bill. Jen, Bill just talked about inclusion, and I really want to get your feedback as to including people is not the end all, right? And so once we do include them, what are kind of measurable steps that we can do to affirm them, to support them in those roles?
Once we think we've included everyone, we still need to ask ourselves who's missing, because there's probably someone we haven't thought of from our perspective. But once we do get there and we do continue to include people, I think that measurable steps are, well, one is like a commitment to diversity. So let's say, just you can use the law school, for example. The law school commits to diversity. It has a diversity statement. It includes X, Y, and Z because this. I would love to see that. And I'd like to see that especially, like I'll never forget applying for jobs when I first graduated, and I do policy work. So one of the places I applied to asked me what my commitment was to diversity. And I just thought that was so strange because I like, just by existing and with my experiences, I will just by default diversify a workplace, but the organization didn't give me any indication of what their commitment to diversity would be for me. So I think really like writing it out and being willing to be held accountable to that statement would be a huge step in the right direction. And then I always get a little nervous with like diversity and inclusion. Like you go to a training and you think you're all set, that stresses me out because we just don't work like that. We're human, we have biases, they persist. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we're socialized to be racist, we're socialized to have bias, we're socialized to be transphobic. So if we aren't acknowledging that and talking about it beyond a training, I think we could get stuck. So like commitments beyond the training, like follow up with that would be really great. And yeah, and just I'm thinking about like a workplace setting, just making sure that we have people who are oppressed people, marginalized people in positions of power. I think it's actually like I get really thrown off, especially here in Hawaii, with like how few Native Hawaiians are in positions of power in our government, in the judiciary, in law firms. I think that speaks volumes that the people who are native to this land aren't being represented fully. And so things like that, when we really start getting inclusive and diverse, we'll start to see those kinds of changes.
Yeah,
Nelson, I would love for you to kind of carry on Jen's conversation
sure.
about it's really important to have representation in positions of power, but how do we get people there? What's the legal pipeline or what types of solutions to the pipeline? Because you've mentioned there are so many working parts to any kind of pipeline. And so what things can organizations do, an employer do to make sure that these pipelines are accessible?
So I have a few thoughts, and I agree that, you can't like check a box, one and done, I did my training and I'm good, right? I got a B+ or something. Like there's no equivalent. As I said earlier, this is lifelong work. Similarly, saying, well, we struck a committee or we did this during Black History Month, or we had this celebration on fill in the blank, History Month or International, Women's Empowerment Day or something, that's not good enough. I think that we need to be strategic, intentional, and smart about growing the pool, right? Because the challenge with the pipeline is we are all competing in quotes for like the same people, basically. I just spoke at McGill this morning, and one of the things that's fascinating is, every school says anyway, they want to diversify, for example, right? Especially in this moment after the killing of George Floyd. And we saw the historic settlement today, right? We'll see, like, this is about resources. And there's a question in the chat that says, for example, what's the difference between equity and equality? And I'll give you a simple example. If we have like a scholarship pool, for example, and we know that Native Hawaiian students and Pacific Islander students just statistically have less money to continue education based on disparities with family wealth and income to wealth disparities that we know exist across many different identity variables, and we give everybody the same award, right? That's equality, but it's not enough to move the needle in terms of equity. another analogy, if we have, an opportunity to have free books for students at the, let's say, middle school level, but none of the books are in Braille. That's not equity for our visually impaired students, right? Like we have to think about what people need to help move them to the place that they want to be, when some people are already sort of born into that space. And so I think we have to be really strategic in ways that we resource other areas of our communities to think about that same influx of investment, resourcing, prioritization around diversity and equity. Since I've become a lawyer, I say I'm a student of power, and we only have so much discretionary time, and we only have so much discretionary money in our personal and our professional spaces. And how we spend that time and that money speaks to our commitments. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about is investing more time and investing more resources, frankly, like in a lot of these areas. And we have to be prepared with all the constellation of constituencies that I mentioned for the concerns that will be levied, which is, well, you're putting more money over here or you're investing over here. And because that's where the challenges lie, is not everybody agrees on how the money should be spent, how the time should be allocated, where the resources should flow. And that's why I think we continue to be stymied in these ways. So these are the conversations that have to start with one, self-awareness, to help us to get to some greater cohesion and coherence around these prioritizations of admittedly constrained resources. But at the end of the day, some of this, at least in the higher ed context, does turn on these sort of bottom line dynamics.
Thank you so much. And I think another really important aspect of diversity is making sure that it's intentional and not tokenized. I've been to too many conferences on Asian Pacific Islander issues where all the breakout sessions are on Asian American issues, and the Pacific Islander portion tend to be the luau, right? And so it's performative. It tends to be some kind of activity like let's make a lei. So that's not diversity, that's not inclusion. We are more than just the aspects of performance. And so I think when we have these kinds of conversation, when we want to bring people in, it has to be more than just, please be a halftime show, right? It has to be more like, we want you to be involved in the planning process. We want you to be involved with kind of creating systemic change or what things we can move on to something more sustainable. So I just want to throw that out there. And we do have time, I think, a little bit to do some questions from the viewers. So please feel free to add to the Q&A box at the bottom. We do have one question that I thought would be really interesting for all of us to kind of talk about. And so I remember watching this really, it's always stayed with me, this civil rights speaker who said that oftentimes we have one hand in front and one hand back. And the visual she gave is like, we're always climbing this ladder and the hand behind us is always wanting to bring people up with us. And the question that this viewer asks is, so much of diversity is how do we bring people up, but how do we empower people to want to come up with you? Because you can only bring horse to water, right? So like, what are some things that we can do either from your own personal experiences or within your institutions that we can empower people to want to have these conversations, want to have diversity be a really key component? So anyone can answer.
So can I give you a really simple example? And a lot of this is like, what can you do? This is the empowering to the audience that we can't see, right? But wherever you are, whatever you do, wherever you live, wherever you meditate, pray, walk, eat, whatever your space is, what can you do? And it has to start with that interrogation of self on some basic level. But I mean, I recall, and this has stayed with me, couple points. When I started teaching in the Midwest, I was entitled to a research assistant, and one was selected for me. And I knew it was a school that prided itself on cherishing diversity. And I asked to see the list of students who were desirous of a research assistantship. And I went back through the list and I hired a person of color. right? Very simple. And so to the extent I've always had, even as dean, the opportunity to hire people, I've been intentional about what my cadre or my cohort of research assistants or TAs, who are they? How can I help them? Because, frankly, assumedly, it helps to have a reference letter from a dean or a professor, right? So that's a little thing I can do. Similarly, and this has been hard here, at every other school I've been at, I've always had my business cards printed in Braille. That is an investment, right? That takes a little bit of time and a little bit of money. And it's something that I think we should provide as a matter of course. It's been complicated here because that's not been the way we do things. But I think with greater intentionality, we can look at little, and it's not little to my students who I've had over the years who are visually impaired. It's been massive to them and alumni when I give them a card in Braille, right? Massive, like moved, massive, right? And so I think that there are all these ways, and it's not me just thinking about race and gender and my sexuality, it's me thinking about what am I not thinking about in terms of my ableism and class and immigration, like thinking outside of ourselves too, right? So I just want to start with those possibilities that every one of us should feel empowered and be called to do better wherever it is that we find ourselves.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Dean says there. And, this old adage, don't forget where you came from, okay? And we overuse that and we give it lip service. But really, we are, as people of color, we have, it's part of our DNA to do this. We have to pull people along. We have to open up doors. When I was on the commission, one of the reasons why I got on the commission was because of the fact that I thought, and there was a group of Black lawyers who thought that there should be an African-American lawyer on the bench. And so we put together ALA, the African-American Lawyers Association, to sort of get us talking, get us moving. And ultimately we did get the first African-American woman on the bench. But what we needed to do is we need to get together, galvanize our thoughts and motivate ourselves to do that. And also when we had lists that were coming out, especially when I became chair of the commission, we'd see lists, and I'd see lists that didn't have, or potential candidate lists that didn't have, the gender that I believe that we should have on there, or the ethnic background. And so I personally went out and called folks and said, hey, why don't you apply? We need people like you on the judiciary, so apply. And that got people thinking, who told me at one point, said, I never thought about it really, but now you got me thinking. So like Dean says, our job is to do something, okay, to help. And so we have to be motivated to do that, and we have to pull people along in that venture.
I agree with everything they both said. And I'm still left with the imagery of Dean Nelson saying that we throw the door wide open for our people to come through. And I think that that's relevant to what you said.
I want to be cognizant of time as well, because I know everyone here has a really busy schedule. And I know Dean Nelson has another commitment. I think we might have time for just one more question, if that's okay. Looking at one, there are a lot of really great questions, which means that people are really invested and interested in this topic, which I think is amazing. And so I hope this conversation has influenced you to want to take this back to wherever you are. But looking at the last question, I think there's a lot of onus on people of color, people who are non-binary, to always do the educating. And it can get really exhausting. And you can burn out. And so what roles do institutions play in educating people so that sometimes it can take that burden off of others?
Institutions can, so instead of, putting it on us to educate everyone all the time, institutions can, of course, hire training courses and things like that, create environments. Something that the ACLU does that I think is really great. They have diversity groups. So if you're NHPI, you can be in their diversity group. If you're non-binary, you can be in their group. So institutions could create like safe spaces, I guess, for lack of a better word, for people inside of institutions, and then hire outside and pay people very well to kind of train and inform and continue the conversations around these heavy issues.
And I want to just say, and respecting that that is real work, right? So having been one of those people who sometimes, is brought in or, is welcomed to have a conversation, especially, during Black History Month, for example. I just want to underscore that sometimes we think this is like this icing or this is fluff. And this is hard stuff. I mean, this is real work. It takes a village to actually to move the needle even slightly. And I think, again, I just want to underscore the need for self-awareness and a commitment on the part of everyone who says they care about these things to do the work that it will take wherever they are in their institutions, in their communities, to see a better outcome. And it won't be easy. So again, how we spend our time, our energies, our money, our resources can make a difference, but it will take effort.
And we need to carry on these conversations, and we need to carry on these conversations where we are, whatever field we're working in, whatever institutions we're dealing with, these conversations have to be undertaken. And that really, as everyone says, moves a needle here when we have these conversations.
So I think that concludes our event. And I just want to say mahalo nui to Dean Nelson, to Bill and Jen, and just thank everyone for just being open. It does take a toll to have these kinds of conversations, and I don't think people know that sometimes. But mahalo again, and I want to pass the torch over to Professor Andrade.
I just want to echo Tapu's sentiments. Mahalo to our panelists and to Tapu for this really great conversation. And, this is the final conversation of our speaker series, but it really is, as some has mentioned, really just the starting point of a conversation that will continue. So please be on the lookout for an announcement about our follow-up roundtable discussion on this issue and the issues that have been addressed in the previous 4 conversations. With over 600 unique individuals in attendance over the course of our series, really thank you to all of you for joining us and engaging in this conversation. Recordings of this conversation and the other programs will be posted on the Judiciary History's YouTube page once they are all captioned. Thank you all again for joining us. Have a safe and happy weekend. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you. Aloha, everyone. Take care.